The Art of Defiance. Chapter 1. Awakening the Echoes. Dawn broke over the basin of time, casting the still water in hues of gold and crimson. Ilyra Yarwin knelt at the water's edge, her fingers trembling as she sketched intricate designs in the damp earth. The festival loomed just days away, offering an opportunity to craft a stunning creation that would empower her fellow villagers and distract them from Cyris's oppressive demands. With each stroke of her charcoal, time slipped away like sand through her fingers. If she failed to weave the maze back to life before the week's end, their artistry's spirit would be shackled by the chains of tyranny. The stakes had never been higher. Ilyra worked with fervor, each line a rebellion against the darkness that encroached upon her village. The sun climbed higher, illuminating her art with fierce urgency. A murmur rippled through the crowd gathered at the village square, laughter replaced by hushed whispers of fear. Just as she began to lose herself in the rhythm of creation, a voice sliced through the morning air, piercing the fragile calm. Bow before the setting sun, or face the consequences of your defiance. Cyris Harrow's words paralyzed her with fear. Her charcoal poised above the earth as the bright colors of her dreams faded in the face of his grim threats. The crowd shifted uneasily, their faces pale and drawn as Cyris's presence cast a shadow over them, suffocating their spirits. Ilyra's breath quickened, her heart racing. 3 days, only 3 days until the festival, and her decision loomed heavy, a boulder on her chest. Create art that would inspire hope, or rally her neighbors against the tyrant. How could she do both? She bit her lip, her brow furrowing as the weight of the choice pressed down on her. As Ilyra stood paralyzed, the charcoal slipping from her fingers and smudging the delicate lines she had crafted, she glimpsed a mother clutching her child, fear etched across their faces. The festival wouldn't shield them from Cyris's tyranny. Time was running out, and each moment lost meant another step toward their doom. The crowd's collective breath hitched as Cyris's eyes glinted with malice, daring anyone to stand against him. Ilyra clenched her fists, resolve hardening. She had to act. With only 3 days left, would she fight for her art or fight for her people? The next decision she made could seal their fate. The basin of echoes stretched out before Ilyra, a vast sunken plaza where the morning sun struggled against the heavy mist rising from the thundering waterfall. The thick air clung to her skin as she stood on the slick, uneven cobblestones, jolts of discomfort shooting through her feet. The scent of damp earth mingled with sweet incense wafting from the altar, a lingering reminder of worshippers who had gathered before her. Towering stone walls, slick with moss and water stains, loomed like ancient sentinels, their carvings whispering tales of past glories and present struggles. Distant shouts and murmurs created a symphony of hope and apprehension that ignited her determination, echoing off the stone walls around her. "We cannot allow Cyris to dictate who we are." Ilyra's voice cut through the roar of the waterfall, fueled by the fervor of the crowd. She scanned the sea of faces, some alight with hope, others shadowed by uncertainty. The vibrant cloth draped over the central altar fluttered in the breeze, and she inhaled deeply, tasting salt and earth on her tongue. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering, but the oppressive weight of doubt clung to her like the humidity in the air. She stepped forward, fists clenched at her sides, grounding herself against the rough texture of the cobblestones beneath her feet. As she spoke, the crowd's whispers faded into anxious silence. Cyris approached, his presence sharp and chilling, slicing through the mist like a knife. Emerging from the shadows, his eyes glinted with malice, silencing dissent with a mere glance. The vibrant energy of the crowd dwindled, giving way to an uneasy quiet that settled over the ancient stone walls. Ilyra's resolve faltered, replaced by a creeping dread as she sensed the power of his intimidation. The scent of incense turned bitter in her throat, and she swallowed hard, steeling herself against the oncoming storm. "You dare challenge my authority?" Cyris's voice boomed, drowning out Ilyra's words like the relentless roar of the waterfall. He stood tall, sunlight catching the sharp angles of his features, casting long shadows that threatened to swallow the gathering. The crowd hesitated, uncertainty clouding their expressions, some stepping back while others glanced toward Ilyra, their faith flickering. Ilyra's stomach knotted as if the very ground beneath her was shifting, ready to swallow her whole. The cobblestones felt slick and cold against her skin, heightening her sense of urgency, yet the atmosphere was suffocating, doubt swirling like the mist around them. Desperation clawed at Ilyra's chest as she watched Cyris revel in the fear he instilled.
The crowd, once united, splintered like shadows creeping across the plaza. The waterfall's roar echoed her frustration, drowning out her voice.
The basin of echoes thrummed with tension beneath the midday sun, the air thick with humidity, and the scent of damp earth mingling with incense. Ilyra stood at its heart, her skin slick with sweat, a reminder of her childhood workshops where creativity blossomed amidst the scent of wet clay. As murmurs rose from the crowd, voices layered over the thunderous waterfall, Ilyra felt their fear weighing on her, heavy and oppressive. This moment was fragile. She had to spark their determination. They needed to see her as their beacon of hope. "Come closer, everyone. We need to talk about what's happening." Ilyra's voice sliced through the noise, urgent and compelling. She stepped forward, hands open, inviting trust. "Cyris's taxes are not just coins taken from our pockets. They're chains binding our spirits. Look at us. We are artisans, creators. We have built this community with our own hands." A ripple of murmurs stirred, but doubt seeped in, dulling their enthusiasm. The scent of incense tugged at her memory, a reminder of her mentor's betrayal, twisting sweet aromas into bitterness. "Yet we can stand together." The words flowed from her, each syllable stitching her closer to the crowd. "Together we can reclaim what is ours. We are not mere shadows in Cyris's game." She reached into her pocket, fingers brushing against her childhood talisman, the one that whispered hope in dark times. "Remember the tapestry of our lives, each thread woven with care. We must not let it unravel." But from the back, Cyris's voice sliced through, smooth yet sharp. "What I offer is your security, Ilyra. These taxes are essential for the strength of our community. Think of your families." His charisma draped over them like a heavy cloak, pressing down on her resolve. The mingling scents of damp stone and sweat filled Ilyra's nostrils, and fear rippled through the crowd, a tide pulling them away from her. "And what of your families, Cyris?" Ilyra shot back, determination burning in her chest. "You think your promises are enough? Look at how you've treated us. You've sold us like cattle, dangling safety like a carrot." The crowd shifted, restlessness palpable, yet uncertainty clung to them. Her words reached out, but the distance between her and the villagers grew, their faces blurring into a sea of doubt. She tightened her grip on the talisman, its edges biting into her palm, grounding her amidst the chaos. The crowd wavered, fear and hope battling in their expressions. Ilyra studied them, her voice steady, cutting through the murmur. "This isn't over," she declared, a quiet but fierce promise echoing in the tumult. Time slipped away, but she stood firm, ready to dive into the unknown. The battle for their freedom was just beginning, and she was determined to lead them forward. The dusk settled like a veil over the basin of echoes, the dying light casting long shadows that danced along the mossy stone walls. Ilyra stood at the water's edge, the mist from the towering waterfall kissing her cheeks, cooling her skin as it mingled with the warmth of the fading sun. The air thickened with the scent of damp earth and the sweet, cloying aroma of incense wafting from the distant altar, wrapping around her like a shroud. The uneven cobblestones beneath her feet felt slick, a reminder of countless gatherings that had left their mark and their stories echoing in the very stones she stood upon. It was a place of fervor and unease, charged with tension as potent as the impending darkness. As she inhaled sharply, the taste of salt and earth lingered on her tongue, a bittersweet reminder of the fight she had just led. Voices murmured in the distance, a chorus of discontent and hope, their echoes bouncing off the slick walls, filling the air with anticipation of something unsaid. The crowd may have parted after the failed rally, but their energy hung in the air, thick and electric, as if the very stones were holding their breath. The waterfall's thunderous roar drowned out the whispers, a relentless reminder of nature's power, just as Cyris wielded power over them. The cool mist enveloped her, a fragile shield against the rising heat of the crowd, now suffocating rather than comforting, as she stood alone. Doubt weighed heavily in her chest, mirroring the chaos around her. She stepped closer to the water, the surface reflecting the deepening twilight, and reached down to touch the cool liquid. It felt alive beneath her fingertips, a stark contrast to the coldness creeping into her heart. The thrill of the fight had ebbed, leaving her with a sense of isolation that clawed at her resolve. The distant trees rustled ominously in the wind, their shadows flickering like ghosts against the stone, whispering secrets she was too afraid to acknowledge. What if she turned away? What if she retreated into her art, where only colors and forms obeyed her? But then a memory ignited within her,
a moment of betrayal that cut deeper than any wound. The scent of her mother's paint, mixed with incense from their home, flooded her senses, awakening a fire within. Ilyra straightened her back, the weight of her fears shifting as clarity began to form like the stars emerging in the twilight sky. She could harness those past betrayals, use them as fuel for her fight. The thought sent a pulse of warmth through her, igniting a long-dormant courage. Ilyra turned to face the imposing stone walls, where the carvings told stories of those who had stood in defiance before her. Tonight, she would not retreat. She would confront Cyris, not just for herself.
Dusk settled over the basin of echoes, the last light bleeding into the water like hope fading. Ilyra Yarwin stood before the gathered community, adrenaline surging through her body. This was her moment to rally them against Cyris Harrow's oppressive demands, to ignite the spark of rebellion. "We are not slaves to his will," she shouted, her voice echoing off the stone walls, urging them to remember their strength and unity. Time was running out. If they didn't act before the week ended, the purity of their art would be corrupted forever, a fate she could not bear to imagine. The crowd shifted, uncertainty flickering in their eyes, and Ilyra sensed their hesitation. From the shadows, Cyris Harrow emerged, his presence like a dark storm cloud looming over the assembly. "How noble, Ilyra! But you underestimate me," he interrupted, his voice dripping with malice. The murmurs of the crowd turned to gasps, fear palpable in the air. "I know about your little escapades, the secret contributions you've made to the community. You think your art can save you?" Ilyra's stomach twisted at the implications of his words. Would they believe him? Would they turn against her? There was no time to lose. She had to counter his threat before fear silenced her completely. With her adrenaline spiking, Ilyra stepped closer to the edge of the basin, her pulse thudding heavily in her ears. "Cyris, your threats can't drown our voices. We create, we inspire. We will not bend to your will." Doubt gnawed at her resolve as she caught the fearful glances exchanged among the crowd. Would they believe in her or succumb to his terror? They had mere days left to act, and every second was slipping through her fingers like water. "You are a fool to think they will stand with you." Cyris sneered, his eyes glinting with cruelty. "When I expose you, they will see who you truly are, a traitor to our cause. No one will follow a coward." The collective breath of the crowd hitched as they processed his words. Her heart raced, urgency clawing at her throat. Failure loomed, and with it, the permanent loss of their freedom. They had to resist, but could she rally them before it was too late? The murmurs grew louder, tension thickening the air, as Ilyra searched the eyes of her friends and neighbors, desperately seeking a flicker of hope. "We have the power to reclaim our future," she cried, voice shaking. "If we don't act now, if we allow fear to dictate our actions, we risk everything we hold dear." But doubt lingered like smoke, and she could see the flickers of hesitation ignite in their expressions. If they didn't unite against Cyris, if they didn't trust her, the consequences would be dire. The echoes of the basin urged her on, but could they? Chapter 2 Whispers in the Dusk. Dusk descended over the basin of echoes, wrapping Ilyra in a humid embrace that clung to her skin like a second layer. Shadows stretched long against the towering stone walls, slick with moss and glistening from the day's warmth. The thunderous roar of the waterfall filled her ears, drowning out the distant murmurs of villagers gathering below. The scent of damp earth mingled with sweet incense wafting from the altar, creating an atmosphere thick with anticipation. Ilyra inhaled deeply, tasting the salt of her own apprehension mixed with the rich aromas. She stepped forward, her resolve hardening against the encroaching night. Ilyra's gaze swept over the crowd, faces etched with anxiety and determination, illuminated by the fading light that cast a dim glow on their upturned eyes. The cobblestones beneath her feet were slick and uneven, sending a shiver of uncertainty up her spine as she steadied herself. "We must stand together," she shouted, her voice carried by the misty spray of the waterfall. But the response was a hesitant murmur. The scent of incense hung heavy, a ghost of the rituals they once celebrated here, now overshadowed by the looming threat of the enforcers. The air buzzed with unspoken fears, a tension that crackled like electricity. Just as Ilyra gathered her breath to speak again, a booming voice sliced through the tension. "You will submit!"
Cyrus Harrow's words echoed off the stone walls, a dark prophecy that sent ripples of dread through the villagers. They recoiled, eyes widening in alarm. Panic surged through Ilyra as the sound of the waterfall seemed to drown her voice. She clenched her fists, grounding herself against the tide of despair, feeling the cool, damp stone beneath her fingertips. Suddenly, a crashing noise erupted from the direction of the village gates, reverberating through the plaza like thunder. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, merging with the waterfall's ceaseless roar. Ilyra's pulse quickened. The enforcers were here. Standing at the edge of the altar, the vibrant cloth brushed against her arm like a ghostly whisper. The world narrowed to the sound of her heartbeat, the villagers' shouts merging into a chaotic chorus of fear and determination. As shadows deepened and the last light vanished, Ilyra's resolve solidified. The air vibrated with the electric charge of impending chaos, the scent of wet stone and incense mingling with the acrid fear that clung to the crowd. They were poised on the brink, caught between the threat of the enforcers and the solidarity she struggled to kindle. The hopes of the villagers rested on her shoulders, and as the echoes of the crash faded into a haunting silence, Ilyra understood.
The basin of echoes thrummed with unspoken dread. Shadows pooling beneath jagged stone outcrops, a majestic waterfall cascaded down one side, its thunderous roar creating a constant backdrop that mixed with the collective anxiety of the gathered villagers. Ilyra stood at the edge of the crowd, a sea of anxious faces reflecting her turmoil. Whispers coiled around her like serpents, each breath heavy with the scent of damp earth and the fear of retribution. She raised her hands, palms open, her voice a beacon amidst the tempest. "We cannot stand idly by. They will come for our loved ones, our homes. We must unite." The words tumbled from her, raw and urgent, yet doubt hung in the air, a current threatening to drag her back into despair. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a hesitant wave of uncertainty. Ilyra clenched her fists, the rhythm of her pulse echoing in her ears, a drumbeat of defiance. She scanned their faces, searching for a flicker of resolve to ignite, but instead fear rippled through the crowd, eyes darting, shoulders hunched. "They want us to cower," she pressed, her voice rising above the whispers. "Look around. This is our home. We cannot let them take it from us." The ground beneath her felt alive, pulsing with the energy of the villagers, yet each word deepened the chasm between hope and despair. Cyris emerged from the throng, a dark silhouette against the morning light, his presence like a shadow swallowing the sun. "And what of consequence, Ilyra?" His voice sliced through the air, smooth yet laden with menace. He brandished his weapon, a glint of steel that twisted the light into something sinister. "Rebellion will lead to suffering. I will not hesitate to punish those who dare defy me." The crowd recoiled, a collective intake of breath, fear twisting their features. Ilyra clenched her fists, anger surging beneath her skin, but it was drowned out by the chill of their fear. She stepped forward, heart racing as she locked eyes with Cyris. "You think your threats will silence us? We stand together against you." Her voice trembled, but she pushed through, channeling every ounce of strength into those words. The villagers watched her, torn between loyalty and terror. Cyrus's gaze flicked over them, a predator sizing up its prey. "You may rally them, Ilyra, but remember, fear is a powerful ally." His smirk was cold and the air thickened with the weight of his warning. Ilyra's resolve flickered, a candle struggling against an unforgiving wind. Silence enveloped the crowd like a suffocating blanket. Ilyra's breath quickened, the reality of her solitude crashing over. The echoes of Ilyra's whispered doubts lingered, a haunting refrain in the humid morning air of the Basin of Echoes. The sun rose, illuminating the clustered faces of villagers, their eyes shadowed with unspoken fears. The towering stone walls, slick with moss, surrounded them, while the thunderous roar of a majestic waterfall provided a constant backdrop, creating a palpable tension. Ilyra stood at the forefront, her voice steady, while her stomach churned with anxiety. Would they rise with her? Or would the weight of Cyrus's threats crush their resolve? She scanned the crowd, searching for a glimmer of determination that might ignite their spirit. Silence enveloped the space, an invitation to hope, but the atmosphere was thick with dread, a prelude to the struggle that lay ahead. "Together we can break these chains," Ilyra shouted, her arms raised high, fingers trembling with urgency. A restless wave of murmurs rolled through the crowd.
Was it courage she saw in their eyes, or merely the reflection of fear? Look around you. We are not alone. They want us divided, but together we are stronger than their steel. Each word spilled from her lips like lifeblood, desperate to pierce the veil of despair. Yet, as she spoke, the atmosphere shifted, charged with a menacing threat. Cyris stepped forward, a dark shadow against the bright morning, his weapon glinting ominously. "And what will your unity bring? A swift end to your lives." His voice roared, laced with malice, cutting through her resolve like a knife. Cyrus's sneer echoed through the basin, a chilling reminder of the power he wielded. Ilyra's stomach twisted at the sight of the villagers' faces, their defiance flickered and dimmed. "You think they will protect you?" he taunted, eyes scanning the crowd, searching for the faintest sign of fear. "You'll meet your end in rebellion? Better to submit, better to live on your knees than die standing? Look at you," he gestured dismissively, the contempt in his posture making Ilyra's insides churn. A flicker of hesitation crossed the villagers' faces, rippling through the crowd. "Stand down, or face the consequences of your foolishness." But Ilyra could not relent. She pressed forward, words tumbling from her mouth in a flood of passion and desperation. "We cannot let fear govern our lives. We must fight for our freedom, for our children." Her voice cracked, the weight of her conviction hanging in the air. The villagers shifted, their gazes darting between Cyris and her, a battle of wills unfolding. Just as hope surged within her, a scream shattered the atmosphere, piercing and raw. Ilyra whirled around, heart racing, as she spotted an enforcer gripping a villager by the collar, yanking him backward into the shadows. The scene unfolded like a nightmare, the air.
Ilyra stood at the edge of the basin of echoes, the stench of smoke and fear still clinging to the air. Shadows twisted around her as the bruised sky loomed overhead, a tapestry of turmoil. The wails of her fellow villagers cut through the somber dusk, each echo a reminder of the chaos that had exploded just hours before. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms, grounding herself in the sharp pain. This was not just the moment of her reckoning, it was theirs too. Would they cower in silence, or would they rise, emboldened by the fire that flickered within her? A gust of wind swept through the basin, carrying the cries of the injured and the helpless. Ilyra's breath hitched, caught between the urge to flee and the need to fight. She glanced over her shoulder, spotting the faces of those she loved, torn, afraid, yet filled with an unspoken yearning for change. The enforcers had come for them, but they wouldn't take her without a fight. Despair weighed her down, threatening to shatter her resolve, yet deep within, an ember glowed, urging her to embrace the past, to channel the pain into strength. She had lost too much already, she would not lose more. Not today. The murmurs of the gathering crowd swelled, a tide of uncertainty and fear. Yet in their eyes she saw flickers of defiance. They were scared, but so was she. A breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward, urgency flooding her veins. This was a moment frozen in time, a choice between action and inaction. Ilyra's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the weight of possibility. She could be their spark, the one who ignited the flame. If she faltered now, the village would remain shackled to the enforcer's tyranny, and she could not bear that burden. The basin echoed with their whispers, a symphony of doubt and hope converging. Ilyra lifted her chin, steadied by the resolve coursing through her. "We cannot let them take us like this." The words spilled from her lips, raw and fierce, mingling with the fading light. She saw the slight nods, the glimmers of recognition. The villagers were waking up, they were listening. Each flicker of acknowledgement fueled her courage. This was not merely about her anymore. It was a community rallying, a shared heartbeat pulsing against the threat. The enforcers had to know they were not alone, not anymore. As the sun sank beneath the horizon, painting the basin in hues of crimson and indigo, the weight of her decision settled within her. She would lead them, not just in battle, but in belief. The enforcers would. The sun hung low over the basin of echoes, casting long shadows that danced along the faces of the villagers gathered in hesitant silence. Ilyra stood before them, pulse quickening as time slipped away. If they failed to rise against Cyris and his enforcers by the week's end, their chance for freedom would vanish forever, corrupted by fear. "Together we rise," she shouted, her voice echoing off the stone walls, a desperate plea to awaken the embers of rebellion in their hearts.
The air crackled with tension, thick enough to choke on as she scanned their faces, searching for a spark of courage amid their wide, fearful eyes. "You think your words can save you?" Cyris sneered, stepping forward, the sunlight glinting off his blade. "Anyone who defies me will suffer. I'll make an example of you. Ilyra and the rest will follow like sheep to slaughter." His voice dripped with malice, cutting through Ilyra's resolve like a knife. The villagers flinched at his threat, their hopes deflating like a punctured balloon, fear rising to the surface. Ilyra's chest tightened, stifling the fire within as she faced the growing doubt among her neighbors. Would they let fear dictate their fate? "Look at them," Cyris mocked, gesturing to the villagers who shuffled back, eyes downcast. "They're paralyzed. You think your art can shield them? You're just a dreamer in a world of nightmares." Ilyra's chest tightened further, battling the stifling fear that threatened to consume her. She had to break through, to ignite their spirits before the enforcers crushed them underfoot. 3 days left, a countdown that echoed in her mind, a reminder that every second wasted was a moment they could never reclaim. No time for doubt, no time for hesitation. "We can fight," she cried, desperation spilling over her words. "We've been silent for too long." The villagers shifted, fear etched on their faces, glancing at each other as uncertainty held them captive. Ilyra's voice trembled with urgency. "We must act now or lose everything. If we wait until the end of the week, it will be too late. They will destroy what's left of our spirit." She stepped closer, searching the crowd for a glimmer of defiance, but their eyes remained downcast, as if afraid to meet her gaze. A knot formed in her stomach as hope began to ebb like the tide, leaving her feeling isolated, the weight of their collective fear pressing down on her shoulders. She had to reach them before it was too late, before they succumbed entirely to despair. The clock was ticking, and the consequences would be dire. "You think you're the hero here?" Cyris interrupted, eyes glinting with malice. "You're just a naive child playing with forces you don't understand. You want to rally them."
Chapter 3. Echoes of Resistance. The Basin of Echoes lay before Ilyra, a sunken expanse where ancient stone walls rose like sentinels, slick with the remnants of past rains and the weight of whispered histories. The air buzzed with humidity, a tangible blanket that clung to her skin, mingling with the heavy scent of incense wafting from an altar draped in vibrant cloth. A majestic waterfall crashed to one side, its thunderous roar drowning out the murmurs of the crowd, sending a fine mist that kissed her cheeks, cooling yet unsettling. Beneath her feet, the cobblestones were uneven and slick, a reminder of countless gatherings and traditions pressing down on her. She squared her jaw, the taste of damp earth lingering on her tongue as she prepared to confront the crowd. Ilyra cleared her throat and stepped forward, the crowd's weight pressing down on her like a physical force. Shadows danced across the stone walls as the morning sun filtered through the swaying branches of trees, their rustling leaves whispering secrets that echoed her unease. She lifted her voice, strong yet trembling. "We cannot let fear bind us, not after what we witnessed." The waterfall roared behind her, a temporary ally in her rebellion, but the sound of Cyris Harrow's voice sliced through the air, silencing her plea. "You think your words hold power here?" Cyris stepped forward, his figure looming, the sunlight glinting off the sharp edges of his armor. The villagers flinched, their eyes wide with fear, as if the shadows of the past wrapped around them, suffocating any flicker of courage. Ilyra's heart sank, sensing the collective dread gripping the crowd, the scent of fear mingling with the sweet incense that now felt stifling. "Remember the punishment for dissent?" he warned, his voice low and menacing, reverberating off the slick stone walls. The echoes felt like chains, binding her resolve. The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers of doubt rippling through them like a distant storm. Ilyra's stomach twisted, the taste of salt sharpening as she scanned the faces of her neighbors, people she had known all her life now silent with terror. "Please," she implored, desperation coating her voice, "if we do not stand together we will be crushed under the weight of this oppression." But the waterfall's roar seemed to mock her, drowning out her words as the villagers turned their eyes away, unwilling to meet her gaze, leaving her feeling isolated, a lone warrior against a tide of fear. As the sun rose higher, tension thickened in the air, humidity wrapping around her like a shroud. She took a deep breath, inhaling the damp earth and sweet incense, willing her heart to steady. "We can change our fate," she shouted again, but the silence that enveloped her was deafening, a reminder of the clock ticking inexorably toward despair. The villagers remained still, their fear a palpable barrier, one that even she could not breach. Ilyra stood at the basin of echoes, the stone walls looming like silent judges, their shadows swallowing her resolve. The air crackled with tension, whispers flaring around her like sparks. The recent punishment of Eldrin still hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The morning sun, once a promise of hope, now glared down, demanding her to act and pull them from the depths of despair. But the villagers remained still, their faces turned from her, as if the very act of listening would draw the enforcer's wrath. Ilyra's heart churned, a tumult of defiance and dread roiling within her as she prepared to speak. Fear is a chain that binds us, and we must shatter it. Ilyra's voice rose, slicing through the murmurs like a sword. She stepped forward, arms outstretched, a beacon against the oppressive silence. Eldrin suffered for the truth, our truth. If we stand together, we can break these chains. But instead of rallying cries, she met downturned eyes and villagers shuffling their feet, their hope buried under layers of dread. What would it take to ignite the fire within them? Cyris emerged from the back, his presence a dark cloud. He leaned into the crowd, voice smooth and chilling. "And what is the cost of your idealism?" Eldrin's screams reverberate in our minds, a warning. "Do you think the prophet will spare us? One by one we will fall. Is that the unity you crave, Ilyra?" His laughter rippled through the crowd, a cruel melody that curled into their hearts. Ilyra's stomach twisted, doubt took root, spreading through the villagers like a poison. Her words faltered, slipping from her grasp. "We can change our fate." Her voice trembled, desperation clawing at her throat. Ilyra clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms, grounding her in this moment of unrest. Yet the villagers remained statues, eyes wide but unseeing, trapped in a web of terror. The weight of their silence pressed down, heavy as stone. She needed them to hear, to feel that spark of rebellion, but the flicker dimmed, swallowed by the resistance born of fear and loss. She stepped closer, heart racing, desperate to bridge the chasm. "Look around," Ilyra implored, desperation lacing her tone. "We are more than just whispers in the wind. Together we can silence the enforcers, we can reclaim our lives." But the words fell flat, swallowed by the murmurs of dissent. Hands fidgeted, eyes darted away. The distance grew, a chasm she couldn't cross. Each heartbeat echoed her isolation, a reminder that she stood alone in this fight. The crowd began to disperse, feet shuffling away, leaving Ilyra standing in a sea of retreating backs. Under the harsh midday sun, Ilyra Yarwin stood at the edge of the basin of echoes, her heart racing as she surveyed the sea of anxious faces before her. The villagers had gathered, their eyes wide with desperation, searching for hope in her words. Time was slipping away. If they didn't rally against the enforcers by the week's end, their art and spirit would be forever stifled. Anger simmered beneath the surface, a fragile flame of resistance threatened by the vice grip of fear. Would they rise to the occasion, or would their trepidation extinguish the flicker of rebellion? "We must stand united against tyranny," Ilyra shouted, her voice raw and urgent, but her words were drowned out by the heavy boots of the enforcers marching into the basin, their shadows casting a pall over the villagers. A knot tightened in Ilyra's stomach as panic rippled through the crowd. Just then, a villager named Tom stepped forward, his voice shaking yet defiant. "We can't let them silence us." Before Ilyra could rally the crowd again, the enforcers seized him, dragging him to the center of the gathering place. A collective gasp echoed off the stone walls as dread settled in. They had 3 days before all would be lost, and Ilyra felt their fear threatening to snuff out her resolve. "Tom, no!" Ilyra cried. But the enforcer's grip was unyielding. They yanked him forward, weapons glinting ominously as they prepared to punish him publicly. Her breath quickened as she watched the terror on Tom's face, disbelief etched in his wide eyes. In that moment she was torn. Should she intervene and risk everything, or stand back and allow fear to silence the hope she had ignited? Each second felt like a hammer striking the anvil of her doubts. The enforcers were about to make an example of him, and if she didn't act now, they would crush the last remnants of resistance in the village. Her heart raced. She had to inspire them, to show them that fear could be overcome. But how could she lead when courage wavered? With a swift inhale, Ilyra stepped forward, desperation clawing at her insides. "Fight with me," she cried, her voice trembling yet fierce. "If we let them break us, we are already lost." But the villagers shrank back, eyes glued to the scene unfolding before them.
The enforcers tightened their grip on Tom, and Ilyra's resolve flickered like a dying flame. The crowd was paralyzed, their fear consuming their spirit. The seconds dragged on, and if she did nothing, Tom would pay the price, and the path to liberation would close forever. Time was slipping away. If she didn't act, it would be too late. As the first strike landed against Tom's back, a sickening crack reverberated through the basin. A surge of fury ignited within.
The basin of echoes stretched before Ilyra, a vast sunken plaza bathed in bright midday light, where sunlight shimmered off the slick, moss-covered walls. The thunderous roar of the waterfall reverberated in the background, drowning out the murmurs of fear that swirled among the gathered villagers like the mist rising from its base. Cool, uneven cobblestones pressed against her feet, slick with humidity that clung to her skin. The air was thick with the scent of wet stone, sweet incense wafting from the central altar, piercing through the damp earthiness engulfing the place. Ahead, villagers gathered, their faces a mosaic of trepidation, uncertainty weighing heavily upon them like the thick air surrounding the plaza. Ilyra raised her voice, her throat dry but her spirit ignited. "Behold this sacred ground, our very essence resides here." The words tumbled from her lips, mingling with the distant roar of the waterfall, a relentless reminder of nature's indifference. Shadows danced along the stone walls, flickering in the light, echoing her call for courage. She surveyed the crowd, their eyes darting toward the enforcers who loomed like dark clouds in the sunlit basin, their presence heavy and oppressive. "They fear us because they know our strength." But even as she spoke, the tension coiled tighter in Ilyra's chest, her pulse quickening under Cyris's piercing gaze. "Remember what happened to those who dared defy them," he hissed, his voice slick like the moss beneath their feet. The murmurs of the villagers grew louder, shadows of doubt creeping into their hearts. Each of Ilyra's words dripped with urgency, yet the flickering resolve she hoped to ignite was snuffed out by the suffocating weight of fear that hung over them. As the enforcers moved through the crowd, their presence stifling, Ilyra fought to break through the wall of fear surrounding her. The waterfall's relentless roar mocked her desperation, drowning out her hopes. She tasted the dampness in the air, feeling the cool mist against her skin, but it offered little comfort against her mounting frustration. The villagers remained paralyzed, eyes cast down as if the ground might swallow them whole. Ilyra stood alone, the weight of isolation pressing down on her, her voice lost among the echoes of despair. With each passing second, the crowd's hesitation felt like a tangible fog, smothering her resolve. Ilyra cast one last glance at the villagers, their faces dimmed by fear and uncertainty, and her heart twisted painfully. The vibrant cloth draped over the altar fluttered lightly in the breeze, a distant memory of what could have been, a community united against their oppressors. As dusk settled over the basin of echoes, the air thickened with the scent of damp earth and the distant murmur of the waterfall. Ilyra stood at the water's edge, the cool mist kissing her cheeks, trying to shake off the echoes of the punished villagers' cries. A few feet away, a group of fishermen folded their nets, laughing softly, oblivious to the weight pressing down on her heart. The last rays of sun danced on the water's surface, yet a chill enveloped her that had little to do with the encroaching night. Her fingers brushed the coarse fabric of her tunic, a common garment faded from years of wear, a stark reminder of her life and the people she fought for. The distant sound of a street vendor hawking herb-infused bread filled the air, mingling with the laughter of children playing nearby, a stark contrast to her turmoil. Ilyra's stomach twisted, hunger gnawing at her as she recalled the vendor's offerings. The thought of bread stuffed with foraged greens and dried meats almost drew her away from the water. Instead, she clasped her hands together, a childhood habit, a prayer to the Mother Water for clarity. Would her resolve be as sturdy as the stones lining the basin? Her gaze fell on the rippling surface, remembering tales of the vanished people, their shadows lurking in the mist, warning those who strayed too close to the water after sunset. The old wives had always said it was best to heed such omens, lest one be lost in despair, like the villager who had suffered earlier. A shiver ran down her spine as the laughter of the fishermen faded, leaving only whispers of her thoughts. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. Ilyra almost heard her father's voice, urging her to lead, to rally the villagers against the encroaching tyranny.
Yet doubt clawed at her. What if they turned away, terrified by the memory of the punishment? A sudden flurry of movement caught her eye, a mother gathering her children close, her fingers brushing the edge of her apron, a sign of gratitude as she offered a small piece of dried meat to a passing child. Ilyra watched the woman bow her head slightly to the child, a gesture of respect she recognized from her past. It reminded her of the weight of her own title and the responsibility it bore, a burden heavier than the coarse fabric she wore. As the last light of day slipped behind the mountains, Ilyra swallowed hard. The fear of punishment loomed over her, darkening her thoughts. Could she truly confront the ruling family, those who dined on elaborate meals while the rest scraped by with stolen grain? Images of the divided classes flashed in her mind, the wealthy feasting on river fish and seasonal fruits, while commoners settled for what was left behind.
Chapter 4. Echoes of Resilience. Dawn unfurled like a whispered promise, casting golden light across the basin of echoes. The waters, still and reflective, held the faces of Ilyra's neighbours, their features etched with uncertainty. In the soft glow she stood with her hands trembling at her sides, the crumbling bread a distant memory. The air buzzed with anticipation, tension crackling like electricity as she recalled the stories of the vanished, those who had dared to defy Cyris Harrow. Today she would not let fear consume her. She lifted her head, grit igniting within her. Together let us weave a tapestry of strength, breaking these chains that bind us. Faces shifted as whispers transformed into shouts, uncertainty etched across their features. A wave of energy surged among them, each heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of her words, yet doubt lingered like a spectre, creeping into the corners of their resolve. She stepped closer, her gaze locking onto familiar faces, friends she'd grown up with, neighbors who had once shared laughter and bread. She needed them to see the truth beneath the fear, to understand that Cyris thrived in their silence. We have the power to reclaim our lives. Yet a chill settled over the gathering as she spoke. The crowd shifted, a collective intake of breath, as Cyris Harrow emerged from the shadows, his presence a dark cloud smothering the morning light. His cloak billowed like smoke, and the air grew still. Ilyra clenched her fists, forcing back the tremor that threatened to betray her. "Do you truly believe you can rise against me? I possess the knowledge of your fears, your secrets, and I wield them like a blade." He stepped forward, a predator among sheep, as the crowd shrank back, uncertainty gnawing at their courage. Her pulse quickened, and she swallowed hard. "No, not now, not again. He lies." She thrust her chin up, willing her voice to carry above the weight of his intimidation. "We are stronger together than apart," but her words collided with the icy grip of his authority. She saw fear flicker in the eyes of her neighbors, their resolve faltering, and for a moment the ground beneath her seemed to shift. Doubt seeped into her bones, tugging at the threads of hope she had woven. Would they stand with her, or would they scatter like leaves in the wind? Silence stretched thick around them. As Cyris's laughter echoed off the stone walls, Ilyra narrowed her gaze to the faces around her, some hardened by fear, others softened by uncertainty. She took a step forward, the sunlight breaking through clouds, illuminating her path. "We can't let him control us." The basin of echoes lay before her, a sunken expanse where the morning light filtered through the mist of the waterfall, casting shimmering reflections across the slick cobblestones. The air hung thick and heavy with humidity, and the scent of damp earth, mingling with the sweet smoke of incense from the altar, draped in vibrant cloth. Ilyra stepped forward, her foot slipping slightly on the uneven stones, grounding her in the moment. The roar of the waterfall drowned out her thoughts, an endless thrum that vibrated through her bones, urging her toward the crowd gathering in anxious murmurs, their fears palpable, echoing off the ancient stone walls. Ilyra reached the central altar, her pulse quickening. The fabric beneath her fingers felt cool and soft against the roughness of the stone, the vibrant hues contrasting sharply with the dull grey of the walls, whispering of a past glory now tainted by deceit. She turned to face the assembly, her gaze sweeping over familiar faces etched with uncertainty and doubt. The tension pulsed in the air, each whisper and shout weaving a cocoon of fear around her, threatening to smother the embers of courage she had ignited within. Cyris weaves a web of fear around you, ensnaring your hearts with his deceit.
Ilyra's voice rang out, slicing through the murmur like a blade. The waterfall's thunder softened momentarily as if the very world paused to listen. The scent of incense swirled, sweet yet cloying, stinging her nostrils and fueling her resolve. Beneath the clamorous shouts, she caught the faint rustle of leaves, the trees murmuring their own discontent with the winds that stirred ominously overhead, a reminder of the storm that brewed within the hearts of her neighbors. Cyris stood at the edge of the crowd, a shadow against the light, his voice smooth yet laced with venom. "You would cast your lot with a traitor so easily swayed by her falsehoods," he spat, his words dripping with malice, echoing the waterfall's distant roar. Ilyra fought the urge to falter, pressing on with clenched fingers around the fabric of the altar. "I am not the traitor. It is he who twists our beliefs for his gain." The murmurs intensified, the crowd's energy shifting, igniting something within them, a flicker of defiance against the oppressive weight of Cyris's influence. As Ilyra's words hung in the air, a palpable shift rippled through the crowd. Faces once shadowed by fear now bore the light of determination, reflecting the sun's warmth, breaking through the dissipating mist. The waterfall thundered behind her, a roar of triumph that mingled with the rising tide of voices, echoing off the stone walls as if all of the basin itself rallied in support. The pulse of their shared resolve surged through her, a heartbeat that would not be silenced, a promise to challenge the darkness together, to reclaim their truth amidst
The roar of the waterfall echoed through the basin, a relentless tide of sound driving the townspeople forward. Shadows lengthened as dusk descended, wrapping around the gathering like a shroud. Faces once shadowed by fear now bore the light of determination, reflecting the sun's warmth breaking through the dissipating mist. Ilyra stepped into the center, the weight of their gazes anchoring her. She could taste the mix of damp earth and incense, a heady cocktail of hope and defiance. The pulse of their shared resolve thrummed in the air, electric with possibility. This was her moment, a chance to reclaim their truth amidst the chaos. Ilyra squared her shoulders, the weight of the evidence pressed against her palm. She raised her voice, clear and unwavering, slicing through the murmur of doubt. Cyris Harrow weaves his web of manipulation, casting shadows of fear upon us like a dark tapestry. Gasps rippled through the crowd, a wave of disbelief. Cyris lurked at the edge, his smirk faltering as she continued, "We are not pawns in his game." Each word struck like a hammer on anvil, forging resolve from uncertainty. The townsfolk stirred, eyes narrowing, their breaths quickening, the air thickening with tension. She could see it, the spark igniting in the depths of their eyes, a flicker of rebellion beginning to glow. Cyris stepped forward, his presence like an iron weight, pushing back against the tide of Ilyra's words. "How dare you challenge the prophet's divine will?" His voice boomed, deep and resonant. "He is our savior. Without him we are lost." The crowd wavered, caught in the storm between loyalty and truth. Ilyra pressed on, her voice rising, fueled by the fervor swelling within her. "What has he given us but lies?" Each syllable dripped with the truth she had uncovered, the evidence now a weapon in her hands. She brandished it before them, the light catching the edges of the papers, illuminating the deceit woven into their lives. "Together we can break his hold." The murmurs swelled, a chorus of voices rising together, drowning out Cyris's attempts to regain control. Ilyra leaned into the surge, her spirit igniting with the pulse of the crowd. "Stand with me," she cried, arms outstretched, a beacon in the gathering shadows. Fear faltered, replaced by a fierce unity. She caught the eye of a woman in the front row, once a friend now turned wary, and in that moment, Ilyra saw the flicker of recognition, the shared understanding that they were all bound by the same chains, the same fear. "We cannot let fear dictate our lives any longer." Her voice soared, wrapping around them like a warm embrace. The basin of echoes thrummed with tension under the midday sun, which poured down relentlessly, casting shadows that flickered like restless spirits. Ilyra Yarwin stood at the center, her pulse quickening with urgency as she faced the gathered townspeople. Today was the day she would expose Cyris Harrow's manipulation and rally the crowd against his deceitful grip. The weight of their collective fate bore down on her, urging her to act before it was too late. If she failed to awaken their minds before the week concluded, they would remain shackled to his false divine demands, their freedom rotting in the corruption he spun. The air felt thick with anticipation, as if the very ground beneath her feet held its breath, waiting for her to ignite the spark of rebellion.
Cyris, Ilyra's voice rang out, slicing through the murmurs of doubt. She gestured to the crowd, her hands trembling with urgency. "You all are aware of the truth. He spins a tapestry of fear, but it's nothing but a web of deceit." The townspeople shifted, uncertainty flickering across their faces, their loyalty hanging in the balance. Cyris stood tall, a smirk playing on his lips, as if her words were mere sparks against the raging fire of his influence. With every second that passed, the pressure mounted. If they didn't unite now, the corruption would fester, and their art, once a symbol of hope, would wither into despair. "We have 3 days. If we don't act, his power becomes permanent," she shouted, desperation lacing her voice. "You're a simpleton, Ilyra. Do you truly believe they would rally behind an idealist rather than a prophet of truth?" Cyris shot back, his tone dripping with disdain. His words sliced through the air, and the crowd hesitated, caught in the tension between faith and doubt. Ilyra felt the weight of their gazes, doubt festering like a wound. She took a deep breath, sweat beading on her brow, and pressed on. "We must reclaim our power. Stand with me." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd, Ilyra's words igniting a flicker of rebellion. But Cyris seized the moment, stepping closer, his presence a dark shadow over her light. "What proof do you have?" he challenged, his voice low and menacing. "You're only sowing chaos." Ilyra's heart raced. She had to act now, to show them the truth before time ran out. She reached for the scroll she had painstakingly gathered, her fingers trembling. The townspeople needed to see the evidence that could shatter Cyris's facade. "Look, this is the truth!" she cried, unfurling the parchment. A loud gasp erupted from the crowd, the tension crackling in the air, electric and potent. The scroll fluttered in the wind, revealing the twisted lies that had held them captive for too long. Ilyra's heart swelled with hope as she caught glimpses of understanding flicker.
Ilyra stood at the forefront of the basin of echoes, the rhythm of her heartbeat reverberating in her chest. The crowd, a shifting mass of anxious faces, clutched their hopes like delicate lanterns struggling against the encroaching dusk. Shadows flickered across the stone walls, and with each murmur that rippled through the throng, Ilyra sensed the rising tide of tension. Cyris's threat lingered in the air, sharp as a blade, but she wouldn't cower. Not now. Drawing in a steadying breath, she prepared to unleash the truth that lay unspooled in her mind, ready to ignite the kindling of rebellion. "Listen to me," she called, her voice slicing through the murmurs. "The prophet has woven lies that bind us." As she spoke, Ilyra's gaze swept over the crowd, catching the flicker of recognition in their eyes. Memories surged, whispers in the night, promises turned to ash. "He has fed us false visions, using our fears to tighten his grip." The words fell like stones, each one heavier than the last, and a ripple of tension coursed through the gathered townspeople, their bodies shifting closer, drawn by the gravity of her revelation. She leaned forward, gripping the rough stone of the podium. "We are not pawns in his game. We are more than his shadows." Cyris surged forward, fury etched on his face. "You're sowing discord." "Ilyra," he boomed, attempting to drown her out. "You'll only bring chaos and despair." But Ilyra stood firm, her heart racing with a blend of fear and resolve. The crowd hesitated, glancing between their prophet and Ilyra. Flickers of doubt danced across their faces, the chains of fear beginning to rust. "Look around you," she pressed on, her voice rising above his. "What has he truly given us?" The murmur swelled, a hesitant surge, and Ilyra seized the moment. "Unity. Together we can break these chains, we can reclaim our voices." A spark ignited in the crowd, a shifting tide of hope washing over their despair. Ilyra's pulse quickened as she noticed clenched fists and nodding heads, each gesture fueling her conviction and igniting the flame of rebellion in the hearts of those who had long been silenced. Yet, as the fervor built, Ilyra's gaze locked with Cyris's, and the crowd faded away, leaving only the two of them. His eyes burned with fury that promised retribution, and the weight of it pressed down on her, threatening to extinguish her newly kindled fire. But she wouldn't back down. Not now. The townspeople surged forward, a surge of determination sweeping through the basin, and Ilyra felt the shift. The clock was still ticking, but this time it sang a different tune, an anthem of possibility. As she raised her arms, the question hung in the air like a storm cloud. Chapter 5. Echoes of Resistance. The crowd surged forward, a chaotic mass fueled by fear and anger. Ilyra stood at the edge of the basin of echoes, her workshop's remnants scattered like forgotten dreams, wooden gears, metal scraps, tangible reminders of what once was. Dusk draped the sky in deep indigo, casting long shadows across the slick stone walls, hinting at the loss that clung to the air. The atmosphere crackled with tension, voices rising and falling in a tumultuous wave, each shout like a heartbeat echoing through the plaza. Ilyra's resolve flickered under the weight of despair, yet a spark ignited within her. She had crossed a threshold. The question loomed, would they rally behind her? Or would they let fear bind them once more? Faces twisted in anger as neighbors shouted, their voices ricocheting off the ancient stones like arrows aimed at a common enemy. Ilyra clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms, anchoring herself against the chaos. They looked to her, no, they needed her. She stepped closer, the rustle of her tattered cloak barely audible over the clamor. Shouts of loss and betrayal filled the air, but it was the gnawing fear that plagued her, a constant echo of Cyris's threats. Would they see her as a leader or just another broken soul? The ground trembled beneath their shared fury. Ilyra paced urgency fueling her thoughts. Memories of her workshop, once vibrant and alive, lay desolate before her. Each fragment of wood and metal told a story, her stories. She inhaled deeply, the scent of damp earth mingling with iron, a reminder of what was at stake. If they faltered now, the maze would remain forever lost, and Cyris's grip would tighten like a noose. Despair was not an option, not now. A sudden hush fell over the crowd, charged silence pulsing with anticipation. Ilyra's breath quickened as she raised her arms, the gesture hesitant yet purposeful. Eyes turned toward her, a sea of uncertainty and hope. We cannot let fear bind us. Her voice rang clear, slicing through doubt. Cyris thinks he can break us, but together we are stronger. As she spoke, she sensed the energy shift, a current of resolve building in the air, igniting courage within her. Would they respond? Would they rise? Murmurs rippled through the crowd, voices rising like waves crashing against a cliff. Ilyra's pulse thrummed in sync with their responses, a symphony of determination. She shared their fears and losses, but also the flicker of hope igniting in her chest. We have the strength to reclaim our futures, the words flowed, each syllable a promise. Faces that had once twisted in despair softened, eyes brightening with possibility. She wasn't alone. They were all in this together. As her voice faded into the dusk, morning light filtered through the mist that clung to the basin of echoes, revealing a crowd gathered near the water's edge. The air was thick with the scent of herb-infused bread from a nearby vendor, its warm crust contrasting sharply with the chill of the basin. Ilyra stood at the forefront, her eyes scanning the sea of familiar faces, each person wrapped in layers of coarse fabric. The muted hues of their clothing blended with the somber atmosphere. A few children nibbled on dried meats, their innocence overshadowed by the tense presence of Cyris's enforcers, their hands gripping the sea's creations, wooden toys and intricate sculptures that once filled the community with joy. This morning, instead of gratitude, the air was heavy with unspoken fears, the looming threat of violence palpable among them. Ilyra stepped forward. Her heart raced in her chest as she clutched a piece of dried fish, a common breakfast for many. She raised her voice, calling out to the crowd, "We cannot let fear chain us. Look around you. The waters are still. The sun rises, and our spirits must rise with it." But as she spoke, the enforcers tightened their grip, sneering at the trembling crowd. Tension hung in the air, thick and palpable, as though the very basin held its breath, waiting for a spark to ignite the smoldering despair. The crowd clutched their children close, eyes flicking nervously toward the enforcers, fearing reprimand. A woman in the back, her hands calloused from years as a timekeeper artisan, met Ilyra's gaze. She offered a deep bow, maintaining steady eye contact, a gesture of respect that rippled through the crowd. Yet the others remained unmoved, silence looming like a shroud. Ilyra's stomach twisted. She understood the weight of tradition and the fear of speaking against the enforcers. "Together we can reclaim what is ours," she pleaded, her voice rising, but the fear woven into the crowd felt impenetrable. A boy near the front whispered a superstitious warning. What if we see a shadow in the mist? Unease rippled through the onlookers, their resolve faltering further. From the corner of her eye, a vendor selling herb-infused bread caught Ilyra's attention, its aroma wafting through the air, reminiscent of evening meals when families gathered to give thanks, not just for food, but for community and resilience. Taking a deep breath, she continued,
We must honor our ancestors, the vanished ones who watch over us. They would not want this. The thought of disrespecting their memory spurred her on, invoking the spirits that had once protected them. May the Shattered One guide us, she called, hoping the invocation would stir something within them, would shatter the spell of fear gripping their hearts.
The sun rose over the basin of echoes, casting a golden hue across the water. Yet this vibrant light could not penetrate the shadows of fear that clung to the crowd like a heavy fog. Ilyra Yarwin stepped forward, her pulse quickened, a drumbeat of urgency in her chest, determined to inspire the paralyzed throng before her. "We must reclaim our dignity," she shouted, her voice steady despite the turmoil swirling within. If they did not act before the week ended, the corruption of their once pure spirit would become permanent, a fate worse than death itself. Cyris's enforcers loomed ominously nearby, their presence a palpable threat, and time seemed to echo in her ears, each moment slipping further away along with their chance to rise against oppression. Ilyra's voice echoed in the tense silence, but the crowd stood paralyzed, eyes darting between her and the approaching enforcers. Every second felt like an eternity, the weight of inaction pressing down on her. "Together we can fight back," she implored, her breath shallow, heart pounding against her ribs. Yet a murmur of dissent rippled through the gathered people, fear tightening its grip. An enforcer stepped forward, a cruel smile creeping across his face, and in one swift motion he seized a man from the crowd, dragging him forward, a warning to the rest. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that filled the air with dread, intensifying the urgency of their situation. They had only days left to act before everything they held dear was lost to darkness. "Look!" someone shouted, pointing at the enforcer's brutal grip. Ilyra's pulse raced as she watched the man struggle, his eyes pleading for help, for anyone to intervene. "We can't let them do this," she shouted, but her words felt like feathers tossed against a storm. The enforcers advanced, their steps deliberate and menacing, each footfall a countdown to despair. If she didn't act now, the crowd would remain trapped in their paralyzing fear. "We must stand together," she yelled, desperation creeping into her voice as doubt loomed larger than ever. She could see resolve slipping away just as quickly as it had begun to form. The enforcer tightened his grip, and with a sudden jerk the man fell to the ground, struggling for air. Ilyra's heart sank at the sight, a stark reminder of the costs of inaction. "We can't wait for someone else to save us," she cried, but the crowd remained frozen, fear paralyzing their limbs. The reality hit her with brutal clarity, words alone wouldn't suffice. If they didn't act soon, the corruption would seep into their very souls. Just as she contemplated her next move, a shout erupted from dusk settled over the basin of echoes, casting elongated shadows that danced among the anxious crowd. Ilyra Yarwin stood at the center, her heart thrumming in her chest as the familiar weight of responsibility pressed down on her. "We have to confront them now," she urged, her voice trembling yet fierce. The enforcers of Cyris loomed at the edge of the gathering, an oppressive presence ready to extinguish any flicker of defiance. If they delayed, if she couldn't rally her neighbors before the week ended, their chance to reclaim freedom and their art would vanish, leaving only the corruption of something pure in its wake. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the scent of damp earth and incense, as the roar of the nearby waterfall provided a constant reminder of the peril they faced. The murmurs of uncertainty rippled through the crowd as Ilyra's gaze flicked to the enforcers, their faces twisted with menace. "They want us to be afraid," she pressed, her voice rising with urgency. "Fear is their weapon. We must stand together." But as she spoke, the enforcers shifted, their lips curling into cruel smiles. Ilyra's pulse quickened, a wild drumbeat echoing in her ears. If they didn't act soon, the weight of Cyris's control loomed over them all. 3 hours until night fell completely, 3 hours until their fate was sealed. "Who will stand with me?" she cried, desperation creeping into her tone. A sudden shout erupted from the back of the crowd, slicing through Ilyra's rallying cry. An enforcer lunged forward, a glinting baton in his hand, and chaos erupted. Bodies surged, screams echoed, and panic flared through the crowd. Ilyra's stomach tightened as she watched her neighbors scatter, their faces pale with fear. "No!" she yelled, pushing against the tide of terrified bodies. She had to be the anchor, the beacon of hope.
but the crowd was unraveling, and time slipped through her fingers like sand. "Stay, we're stronger together." But as Ilyra fought against the crushing panic, a handful of neighbors stepped forward, eyes determined amid the chaos. A wiry man named Lorien gripped her arm, his expression fierce. "I'll follow you, Ilyra. We're not done yet." A flicker of hope ignited within her, but it was overshadowed by the realization that the majority remained frozen, paralyzed by fear. How could she lead them into confrontation with only a fraction willing to fight? The enforcers advanced, their laughter a sickening sound, and the clock was ticking. If she didn't act now, they would lose everything. With a deep breath, Ilyra faced her small band of supporters. "We charge together," she commanded, her voice a rallying cry that fought against the fear tightening around her throat.
The echo of gunfire lingered, sharp and raw, as Ilyra stumbled into the shadows of the Basin of Echoes. The crowd roared like a tempest, voices rising and crashing against the stone walls. Yet here, amid the thrum of chaos, found an uneasy quiet enveloping her. Water cascaded in the distance, a soothing counterpoint to the turmoil in her chest. She pressed her palms flat against the cold, damp rock, grounding herself, but the tremor in her fingers betrayed her. The weight of her neighbor's fear wrapped around her, clinging like mist, heavy and suffocating. Was this the moment she had been waiting for, or a reckless plunge into despair? The echoes of chaos faded into the background as Ilyra leaned against the wall, breath hitching in her throat. She peered into the gathering dusk, where shadows danced like spectres across the ground. The waterfall's roar pulled at her thoughts, a reminder of nature's indifference. She had led them into chaos, but now uncertainty gnawed at her resolve. Would they still rally behind her? A flicker of doubt ignited, warm and familiar, but she chased it away. No time for hesitation. Her fingers curled into fists, nails digging into her palms, anchoring herself in the moment. They needed her to be strong. She had to be the beacon they sought. All around, the crowd's murmur pulsed like a heartbeat, steady yet laden with fear. Ilyra leaned her back against the stone, feeling its chill seep into her skin. The faces of her neighbors flashed before her children, the elderly, the brave, the lost. Each pair of eyes held a glimmer of hope, a flickering flame she had to nurture or snuff out. She hungered for their trust, yet how could she inspire when she felt so fragile? Her throat tightened as the weight of their expectations bore down on her. Would they see her as a leader or merely a coward? She tasted the cool air, tinged with the scent of wet earth, a reminder of nights spent under the stars, dreaming of a future where fear held no sway. That dream felt distant now, an illusion slipping through her fingers. But retreating? No, she couldn't. The enforcers were ruthless. Their weapons drawn and ready to turn her back would mean accepting defeat. Ilyra straightened, her heart quickening as she envisioned the next steps. If she led them back to the fray, could she wield courage like a sword? A voice called to her from the depths of the crowd, a familiar tone cutting through the din. "Ilyra." It was Tom, his face pale but determined. He pushed through the throng, eyes searching for hers. The moment their gazes locked, a surge of warmth spread through her. Chapter 6. Echoes of Resolve. Ilyra Yarwin stood at the edge of the Basin of Echoes, the morning sun glinting off the artifact in her trembling hands. It pulsed with a warm, heavy light, a beacon of hope and responsibility. This was not just an object, it was a symbol of their resistance against the tyranny of Cyris Harrow. Whispers from the crowd swirled around her, anticipation crackling in the air. Yet beneath that hope lay a gnawing fear. If she failed to inspire them, if she faltered before the week ended, the consequences would be dire. The relentless pressure of time bore down on her like a relentless tide, a promise that something pure would be corrupted forever. The crowd shifted, their eager faces a blur of expectation, but all Ilyra could feel was the pounding rhythm of her heart. "They need you, Ilyra. You must lead them." A voice inside her urged, but another whispered doubts. What if she wasn't enough? What if her words fell flat? The artifact felt heavier, a tangible reminder of her inadequacy as she fought against the swell of uncertainty. A life spent in the shadows, creating art for the community, suddenly felt insufficient. She had to summon courage from within, but the pressure was suffocating.
Time was slipping. She could almost hear the ticking clock echoing in her ears, each second a reminder of the urgency to act. With every passing moment, Ilyra's resolve wavered, and the murmurs of the crowd grew louder, transforming into a cacophony of doubt that echoed within her mind. What if they see you as a failure? The thought coiled tighter around her, squeezing her breath. She glanced at the faces of those she loved, their trust heavy on her shoulders. To falter now would mean more than just personal failure. It would mean losing their chance at freedom. The enforcers were closing in, and if she didn't rally them before the week ended, they would be crushed under Cyris's oppressive rule. 3 days left, 3 days to change everything. The weight of that countdown pressed on her chest, the air thick with tension. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, her voice faltered, overwhelmed by a wave of anxiety. The crowd waited, their eyes fixed on her with a mixture of hope and desperation. But all she could do was stand frozen, clutching the artifact like a lifeline. I can't do this. I'm not a leader, she questioned herself, but in that moment a sudden surge of anger sparked within her. They deserved a voice, a chance to reclaim their art and their freedom. Yet here she was.
Ilyra stood at the edge of the basin of echoes, the first light of dawn casting long shadows over the gathered villagers. The air thrummed with anticipation, a collective heartbeat matching her own. Today she would unveil the prophet's deception, rallying them to reclaim the freedom that had slipped through their fingers. Time was running out, the week was nearly over, and if she didn't act decisively, their hopes would become permanently buried under layers of lies. The enforcers were already closing in, their presence a dark cloud looming over her resolve. Ilyra stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around her. Listen, the prophet has deceived us all, manipulating our fears to tighten his grip. We must unite against this tyranny. But before she could finish, Cyris Harrow, the prophet's right hand, emerged from the crowd, a smirk hovering on his lips. And what proof do you have, Ilyra? Your claims are nothing more than desperate cries of a failed artist. The crowd shifted uneasily, and doubt threatened to seep in. Ilyra fought to regain control. She couldn't let uncertainty fester among them. The truth is in our art, Ilyra shouted, desperation creeping into her tone as she scanned the faces before her. We have created beauty despite his oppression. But Cyris pressed on, his words weaving through the villages like poison. Art or mere folly? You think your paintbrushes can shield you from the blade of the enforcers? You're leading them to ruin. Panic bubbled within her as she watched some villagers exchange glances, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. The enforcers would soon descend upon them, and the seeds of doubt Cyris planted threatened to unravel everything she had fought for. Each word felt like a knife. No, she cried, her voice rising in urgency. We can't let fear dictate our future. The prophet has lied to us. We must stand together. A few brave souls rallied behind her, yet the majority wavered, their resolve crumbling under Cyris's onslaught. Ilyra's mind raced, heart pounding in her ears. With every passing moment the distance between her and the crowd widened, hope slipping through her fingers like sand. As murmurs of doubt swirled, Ilyra fought to maintain her composure. The enforcers would arrive any moment, and the crowd was splintering, loyalty fraying. I need a new strategy, she thought, determination battling against the tide of uncertainty. Just then the distant sound of marching boots echoed ominously through the basin. Ilyra's stomach dropped. They were here. If she didn't act now, the villagers would be lost, caught between the prophet's lies and Cyris's deceit. We will not be silenced, she shouted. The basin of echoes resonated with an electric tension, the air thick with the murmurs of the gathered villagers. Ilyra stood at the center, her heart thudding in rhythm with the anxious breaths of those around her. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the towering cliffs that enclosed the plaza, casting long shadows on the uneven cobblestones. Each gaze from the crowd felt like a weighty shroud pressing down on her. They needed her to believe, needed to find light in the shadows of doubt that loomed over them. Ilyra inhaled deeply, her resolve hardening. This was her moment to reclaim their faith. Listen to me, she called, her voice cutting through the tumult. The murmurs quieted, curiosity igniting in their eyes. Ilyra raised her arms, palms open, inviting them into her words. The artifact is a beacon of hope, guiding us away from the prophet's deception.
Her voice rang out, steady and unwavering, fueled by the urgency of her message. Some faces softened, yet remnants of doubt lingered. She could sense the resistance in their posture, the tension in their jaws. For years we've been led astray, shackled by lies. The truth is here, and we must seize it together. But before she could weave her vision, a figure advanced through the throng, slicing through the crowd with chilling intent. Cyris Harrow stood before them, his presence a looming shadow. He brandished a scrap of parchment, wrinkled and stained. "Lies," he shouted, his voice a whip crack. "Look, proof that the artifact brings destruction." The parchment became a weapon in his hands, a shield against her truth. Ilyra's stomach twisted at the sight. She wasn't prepared for this. The crowd's energy shifted, disbelief creeping into their expressions. She could almost hear the collective gasp, a sharp intake of breath that echoed her deepest fears. "Ilyra cares not for your lives. She seeks power." Cyrus's words painted her as a charlatan, and unease rippled through the crowd. Ilyra's heart sank as she watched them teeter on the edge of doubt. But she couldn't let them fall. "No," she cried, desperation igniting her resolve. "I would never betray you." She surged forward, meeting the sea of eyes that flickered with both hope and doubt. "I stand before you not for power, but for truth. If we do not unite, we will wither like forgotten dust." With every word, she fought back against the tide of fear. She drew the crowd closer, not with grand gestures, but with a simple truth. "We are stronger together. I believe in you." The murmurs shifted, uncertainty battling the spark of renewed hope. Ilyra's breath came in quickened bursts, but she held her ground, feeling the weight of their gazes. This was not just a fight for the...
The basin of echoes enveloped Ilyra like a living entity, its vastness both exhilarating and intimidating. Sunlight streamed down, glinting off the slick stone walls where ancient carvings whispered of time. The air, thick with humidity, tasted of damp earth, while the relentless roar of the nearby waterfall drowned out the distant murmurs of the gathering crowd. Cool mist swirled around her, offering a brief reprieve from the warm pulse of her fear and resolve. The uneven cobblestones beneath her feet, slick from countless gatherings, shifted with each step, a reminder of the precariousness of their collective fate. She steadied herself at the central altar, vibrant cloth billowing around it like a flame, contrasting sharply with the dark stone backdrop. The scent of incense curled through the air, sweet yet heavy, tugging at her memories of whispered prayers and promises long forgotten. Ilyra gripped the edge of the altar, the rough texture of the woven fabric grounding her as she raised the ancient artifact high above her head. The crowd, a sea of faces painted with anticipation, fell into a hushed silence, their eyes glimmering with hope and fear. In that moment the air crackled with potential, a taut string ready to snap. "This artifact, a testament to our true history," she shouted, her voice rising above the tumultuous roar of the waterfall, echoing off the moss-covered walls. "For too long we have lived under the shadow of deceit." The words tasted bitter and bright as she scanned the crowd, their expressions shifting like sunlight filtering through the trees. A few nods of agreement rippled through the throng, infusing her with determination, even as doubt lurked at the edges of her resolve. From the outskirts, Cyris Harrow's voice sliced through the air, sharp and insidious. "What proof do you have, Ilyra? This relic, mere trinkets can't change the truth?" His contempt ignited murmurs of dissent that echoed against the stone walls. Ilyra's pulse quickened, matching the relentless beat of the waterfall as she fought back despair. She could not let his venom seep into the hearts of her people. "The truth lies within this artifact," she declared, her voice steady and uncompromising. As she lowered it, sunlight caught its surface, illuminating intricate carvings that told stories of their ancestors, shimmering like a beacon against encroaching shadows. The crowd leaned in, captivated, the scent of incense mingled with their sweat. A heady concoction of anxiety and hope as she finished her speech, tension coiled tightly in the air, thick but tempered by flickers of determination. The crowd's murmurs swelled, a symphony weaving together in a tapestry of resolve. Ilyra sensed the shift, the spark igniting within them, a fierce rebellion. Ilyra stood at the edge of the basin of echoes, the twilight sky bleeding crimson hues as dusk sank into the horizon. The air crackled with energy, the murmurs of the crowd weaving a tapestry of desperation. She had to rally them now, before the weeks slipped away into shadows and the chance to reclaim their freedom vanished forever. The ancient artifact, heavy in her hands,
gleamed ominously, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. If we do not weave our souls together against this tyranny, we shall lose the very essence of our purity. Her voice rang out, trembling with urgency, echoing through the basin as each heartbeat drummed a reminder of their dwindling time. Time was their enemy. Failure meant the corruption of their very souls. Look at this relic. Ilyra raised the ancient artifact high, its surface catching the last rays of sunlight. This is not just stone, it is our history, our strength. Together we can defy the prophet and reclaim our fate. The crowd stirred, eyes wide with hope, yet in the back, Cyris Harrow's sneering voice cut through the air like a dagger. Hope you dare to bank your lives on this mere trinket? His laughter echoed mockingly, each chuckle a poison that seeped into the hearts of the people. Ilyra's hands trembled as her breath quickened. Tension coiled around her, each moment amplifying her urgency. We have until the end of the week to act. If we falter, we lose everything. She pressed on. Ilyra swallowed hard, her voice wavering as she spoke, knowing how easily doubt could extinguish their flickering flame of rebellion. You're a fool to believe in fairy tales, Ilyra. Cyris stepped forward, weaving through the crowd, eyes glinting with malice. The prophet has power. He will crush any who oppose him. The audience shifted uneasily, their faces turning pale, eyes darting around as fear took hold. Ilyra felt the weight of their doubt. They were close, so close to breaking free from the chains of fear. No, the prophet is a liar, she shouted, her voice rising above the murmurs of uncertainty. We were born from this land, and we have the strength to rise above his tyranny. Her words hung in the air, and the crowd stood still, uncertainty clouding their faces. You think they care about your dreams? Cyrus's voice was a low growl, weaving doubt like a web. They care about survival. You say we have 3 days, but what if it's 3 hours before he sends his soldiers to silence us? Every eye shifted, glancing nervously at the shadows creeping in as the sun sank lower. Ilyra's resolve solidified. Then we fight now. Together, the fire within her ignited.
Chapter 7. Whispers of Resistance. The basin of echoes thrummed with unrest, a sea of anxious faces reflecting the morning light that struggled to penetrate the gloom of uncertainty. Ilyra stood at the center, heart thumping in her chest as she faced the crowd caught between hope and fear. Moments ago she had called for unity, her voice a beacon cutting through the darkness. Now the air crackled with tension, the whispers of doubt swirling around her, thick and ominous shadows flickered at the edges as a cloaked figure loomed, a dark reminder of the stakes. They had mere moments to decide their fate. Would fear bind them, or would they dare to rise? Ilyra took a breath, steadying herself as she stepped forward, each footfall echoing in the hollow space. Listen, her voice pierced through the murmur, rising above the chaos. This deity beckons a metamorphosis, not mere subjugation. Let not our fears bind us. United we can sculpt a radiant future, illuminated by the fires of courage and solidarity. A flicker of determination ignited in some, eyes brightening with possibility. But, before it could catch fire, a derisive laugh sliced through the air. Cyris emerged from the throng, his presence a chilling spectre, a serpent coiling among the unsuspecting. And what a treacherous path that might be, he called out, his voice smooth like oil, lacing through the crowd. Unity or a fool's errand? Ilyra waxes poetic about courage, yet what follows defiance against the god? Retribution, annihilation. His words slashed at Ilyra's message, twisting it into a weapon. Murmurs erupted, fear creeping back into their eyes and clenching their hearts like a vice. Cyris smiled, savoring the discord. You want to challenge the god? Cyris continued, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, a predator sizing up prey. What of your children, your homes? The god demands obedience, and defiance will bring calamity. Ilyra clenched her fists, the heat rising in her chest. They were so close, she needed them to see the truth. No, Cyris, it is not fear that keeps us safe, it is our courage. The words spilled from her lips, each syllable a plea. She raised her arms, inviting them to join her, to rise against the tide of despair. Some stepped forward, eyes bright with defiance, but others shrank back, uncertainty shadowing their faces. A palpable divide formed, a chasm of loyalty and doubt. A relentless rhythm urged them to choose. The morning sun caught her hair, casting a halo around her.
We can break the chains of fear. We are stronger together. But Cyris.
Dusk draped the basin of echoes in shadows, the air crackling with potential. Ilyra Yarwin stood at the center, her heart thudding against her chest as she faced the gathering crowd, determined to transform their fear into courage. "We stand upon a fragile cusp of fate," she called, her voice rising above the murmurs. The weak was slipping away, and the threat of losing their agency felt like a haunting presence, corrupting their purity. If they faltered here, the darkness loomed, ready to consume them before dawn. It was now or never. The truth behind the god's demand is not a curse, but a manipulation. Cyris Harrow stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the crowd like a dark omen. "Do you truly believe you can defy the divine will?" His voice dripped with derision. Ilyra had to cut through his bravado. "Fear is a prison," she shouted, her voice fierce and unwavering. "The god's power is only as strong as the fear we feed it." The crowd stirred, doubt creeping in, but Cyrus's grin only widened. "What will you do when the god turns his gaze from us, when you're left with nothing but ashes?" His words wrapped around them, tightening like a noose, but Ilyra refused to yield. No time for hesitation. They needed to hear the truth before it was too late. Ilyra pressed on, her pulse quickening as she sensed the crowd's rising resolve. "Together we can break free," she urged, her voice imbued with passion. "The god demands our compliance, but we hold the power to reclaim what is ours." The crowd began to shift, a surge of resolve forming as whispers of unity began to weave through them. But Cyrus's voice cut through again, sharp as a knife. "And if we defy, the god will unleash his wrath." Panic rippled through the crowd. They had days left, and with every second that ticked away, the threat of corruption loomed larger. They had to choose now. "We're not powerless," Ilyra cried, drawing in a deep breath. "If we let fear rule us, we become the shadows we dread." Her words struck chords of defiance, lighting sparks of hope. Cyris scowled, desperation creeping into his eyes. "You think they'll follow you? They'll only follow their instincts to survive." But the crowd was shifting, the realization of their collective strength dawning. "What do we choose?" she urged, her heart pounding as the moment hung in the air. "Freedom or fear?" The decision weighed heavily upon them, a fragile thread linking them to a dark future if they did not act soon. As the murmurs crescendoed into a roar of unity, Ilyra's heart soared, but a shadow flickered across her resolve. The clock was still ticking, and they had mere hours left to seal their fate. Dusk draped the basin of echoes in a cloak of twilight, the air thick with the scent of river fish grilling over makeshift fires. Shadows flickered among the gathered crowd as Ilyra Yarwin stepped forward, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, her tunic woven from coarse fabric blending seamlessly with the muted colors of the common folk surrounding her. Children clutched herb-infused bread stuffed with dried meats, nibbling nervously as their parents exchanged wary glances. The waterfall's echoes sang above, a haunting reminder of the power that once flowed freely, now diminished. In the distance, Cyrus's figure loomed, a dark silhouette against the fading light, his eyes glinting with contempt. Ilyra steadied herself. Her community's spirit was at stake. Ilyra raised her voice, steady despite the tremors of anxiety coursing through her. "The Shattered One demands our tribute, not our subjugation." She gestured toward the crowd, fingers trembling like the leaves of elder trees. A murmur rippled through the crowd, punctuated by the sharp snap of a twig underfoot. Nearby, a market trader paused, his basket of foraged greens forgotten as he glanced between Cyris and Ilyra, weighing his loyalties amidst the palpable tension. Cyris stepped forward, his presence monumental eyes narrowed as he sought to instill doubt. "You trust her? The god's wrath is not to be trifled with. Do you wish to see shadows lurking among us?" A collective intake of breath echoed through the crowd. Ilyra sensed the weight of superstition settling over them. She held her ground, recalling the shared ritual of gratitude before meals, a bond forged through unity. The warmth of past gatherings felt distant now, overshadowed by the looming threat. "We are more than fear. We are the pulse of this basin." Ilyra shouted, raising her hands, palms open, an unspoken gesture of unity. A murmur of agreement swelled, igniting a flicker of hope. Behind her, two fishermen exchanged glances, nets draped over their shoulders, momentarily forgotten in the face of something more vital: community. Cyris sneered, anger flashing across his face. "You think they will stand with you?
You'll be nothing but a memory lost like the vanished people." His words dripped with malice, an attempt to sever the bonds Ilyra sought to weave. But the crowd stirred, the tide of fear ebbing as whispers of solidarity began to rise. Ilyra felt the familiar warmth of unity at their backs. "Together we rise," she yelled, and the crowd answered, their voices mingling like the sound of the waterfall behind them, fierce and unstoppable. As the last rays of sun dipped below the horizon, the crowd's resolve solidified like the stone of the waterfall's edge. Their voices echoed through the basin.
The basin of echoes thrummed with a pulse of anticipation, a living entity as Ilyra stepped forward. The air was thick with collective fear, a weight that hung in the atmosphere, but beneath it flickered a spark of defiance among her neighbors. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of determination. Whispers transformed into shouts, and amidst the cacophony, a single truth began to unfurl. "May the flame embrace us in its warmth," she murmured, the words slipping like smoke from her lips. Today she would untangle the threads of Cyris's deceit and weave them into a fabric of unity. They had endured long enough. They would reclaim their lives. Ilyra's gaze swept the crowd, catching the flicker of doubt in their eyes. Cyris had wrapped them in his silken lies, binding them with a fear that coiled around their hearts. But she stood firm. "The god's decree is absolute. We shall bow to none but the divine." Her voice rang out, echoing off the towering stone walls. A murmur rippled through the throng, hesitant yet growing. She leaned into it, drawing strength. "What if the god's demands are a mirror, a reflection of our own doubts?" With each syllable, Ilyra struck against the chains that had bound them. "We are not puppets on strings. We are the architects of our fate." The air thickened with resolve, an electric charge sparking in the space between them. Shoulders straightened, jaws clenched. The weight of the past began to lift, unraveling like the frayed edges of an old tapestry. They were not alone. They were a community forged in the fires of shared struggle, and that struggle had birthed resilience. "Look around you," she commanded, her voice rising above the clamor. The basin reverberated with the echoes of her challenge. "Every face here tells a story, each a thread woven into this tapestry of life. Together we can defy the god's whim." The crowd hesitated, caught between fear and the flicker of hope she ignited. Fists clenched, breaths quickening, she pressed her palms together, pulse quickening with their rising energy. Fear cannot own us. With each passing moment the tide turned. Faces that had once been shadowed by despair now glimmered with courage. Ilyra felt the swell of their unity, a force that could push back against the darkness. "We reclaim our maze," she cried, her voice a rallying cry. "We decide our path." The crowd erupted, a chorus of shouts igniting like wildfire. They surged forward, emboldened, and Ilyra stood at the forefront, a guiding light Dusk settled over the basin of echoes, casting the vast plaza in deep hues of indigo and violet. The towering stone walls, slick with moss and water stains, embraced the crowd, amplifying the murmurs of unity that spiraled around Ilyra. She stood at the center, feeling the warmth of bodies pressing in, a living current of hope and defiance. The air was thick with anticipation, charged by the scent of damp earth and the distant roar of a majestic waterfall. Ilyra straightened, her resolve hardening like steel. They had escaped the labyrinth of fear, but the shadow of Cyris loomed, threatening to extinguish their hard-won flame. Together we weave a tapestry of strength. Ilyra's voice sliced through the murmurs, sharp and clear. She raised her arms, inviting the energy to swell. Faces turned toward her, eyes glimmering with purpose. Cheers erupted, a thunderous wave crashing against the stone. Yet in the periphery a figure loomed, Cyris. His smirk was calculating, his presence a shadow slipping through the cracks of her light. Cyris stepped forward, his voice smooth as silk laced with poison. "But tell me, Ilyra, what price shall you pay for this folly?" The crowd faltered, a shiver of uncertainty rippling through them. "Defy the god, and you'll invite his wrath. You think you've freed yourselves, you've only invited ruin." The tension was palpable, balancing precariously between hope and despair. Ilyra clenched her fists, grounding herself in the hope of her community. They couldn't be swayed, couldn't let fear creep back into their hearts. "Listen to me," Ilyra commanded, her voice rising above the dissent. "Cyris thrives on fear. He wants you to believe you're powerless."
A few stepped closer, drawn by her intensity, while others hesitated, ensnared by Cyris's doubt. Ilyra fought to reclaim the narrative, desperation mingling with resolve. We are not mere pawns in his game, we are the architects of our fate. The crowd surged toward her, a powerful tide against uncertainty. Yet in their eyes Ilyra glimpsed the flicker of fear, a reminder of their fragile unity. She lifted her chin, energized by their response, though a knot twisted in her gut. The evening air thickened, charged with anticipation, as the last light faded, leaving only the promise of the night. A question hung in the air. What would it take to truly free them?